They thought I was just a landowner who stayed away too long. A man who left his land unattended, unprotected, forgotten. They assumed time had weakened my claim. That distance had erased my authority. But what they didn't understand was that some things don't fade with time. Some things don't lose value when left alone. Some things become stronger, quieter, more certain, because this wasn't just land. It was 500 acres of inheritance, memory, and legal truth, waiting silently in the forest, watching, enduring, remembering. And when I returned after 1 year, everything had already changed, but not in a way I expected, not slowly, not naturally, but suddenly, like something had moved in while I was gone, and decided it belonged there. My name doesn't matter here, because this story isn't about identity. It's about ownership, responsibility, and the moment when both are challenged. What matters is the land I inherited. 500 acres of dense timber forest. Not just trees, but history, passed down from my grandfather. A man who never saw land as property. He saw it as something alive, something that needed to be respected, not controlled. There was no mansion on that land. No luxury house hidden between the trees. No city lights glowing in the distance. No signs of modern comfort. Just trees. Endless rows of them. Tall, thick, rooted deep into the earth. Standing like silent witnesses to everything that had ever happened there. When the wind passed through them, it didn't just make sound. It created something else. Something older. Something that felt like memory itself moving through the forest. I grew up walking through those trees. Not running. Not playing. Walking. Because my grandfather never rushed when he was there. He moved slowly. Deliberately. Like every step mattered. And sometimes, he would stop without warning. Place his hand against the bark of a tree. Close his eyes for a moment. And then say something I never forgot. This land does not forget who respects it. And it never forgives who steals from it. At the time, it sounded like a lesson. One of those sayings older generations passed down. Something poetic. Something symbolic. But not something literal. Not something real. At least, that's what I believed back then. But now, I understand it differently. Because land doesn't forget. Not in the way people do. It doesn't lose track of ownership. It doesn't erase boundaries. It doesn't ignore truth. It simply waits. And when the time comes, it reveals everything. For years after inheriting it, I managed that land carefully. Not aggressively. Not emotionally. But precisely. I didn't rush into development. Even when people suggested it. Even when offers came in. Even when it could have made quick profit. I didn't sell it. Because selling it would mean losing something that couldn't be replaced. I didn't divide it. Because dividing it would break something that was meant to remain whole. Instead, I preserved it. Quietly. Consistently. I allowed limited, sustainable logging. Controlled areas. Strict agreements. Everything documented. Everything legal. Every contract reviewed. Every detail recorded. Because land like this is not just something you own. It's something you protect. I maintain the boundaries. Survey markers. Coordinates. Legal descriptions. Every inch of that 500 acres was accounted for. Not assumed. Not estimated. But proven. Recorded. Verified. Because responsibility doesn't allow gaps. And land ownership without documentation is just a claim waiting to be challenged. But more than anything, I protected it with silence. No attention. No publicity. No unnecessary involvement with outsiders. No disputes. No conflicts. Just quiet management. The kind of quiet that makes people think nothing important is happening. That was my life. Stable. Predictable. Under control. Until I had to leave. For 1 year. At first, it wasn't supposed to be that long. A business opportunity overseas came up. Short-term. Temporary. Something that required my presence. Weeks turned into months. And months stretched into a full year. But before I left, I made sure everything was in order. I didn't take risks. I didn't assume things would remain the same. I checked every legal document, updated records, confirmed tax filings, verified land boundaries, reviewed security measures. Everything was aligned. Everything was secure. Everything was exactly how it should be. At least, that's what I believed. Because when I returned, nothing felt the same. Not immediately, not dramatically, but subtly, like something was off. The road leading to my property had changed. What used to be rough, natural, untouched, was now paved, smooth, artificial, intentional. Then came the signs. Clean, modern, placed with purpose. Not temporary markers, but permanent installations. And then, I saw it. A gate. Large. Metal. Designed to control access. Security cameras mounted above. Intercom systems installed. Technology where there used to be nothing. And in the center, a polished sign. New. Perfectly maintained. It read, Silver Ridge Estates, Private HOA Community. I stopped the car, completely still, because for a moment, my mind didn't try to process it. It just observed. Try to understand how something like this could exist. Without my knowledge. Without my involvement. Without my permission. I had never heard of this place. Never approved anything like it. Never signed anything that would allow it. And yet, it stood there. Real. Operational. Active. I slowly drove closer. The gate opened automatically. No resistance. No question. Like I belonged there. But something inside me knew. This wasn't right. I drove through. And that's when everything changed. The forest was still there. But it was no longer untouched. Inside my land, there were houses. Not one. Not a few. Dozens. Entire streets. Carefully planned. Structured. Built with intention. Streetlights lined the roads. Mailboxes stood in perfect alignment. Driveways connected homes. Cars parked neatly outside. Families walking casually. Children playing. Laughing. Living. Like this place had always existed. Like it belonged there. Like it was normal. But it wasn't. Because none of it was supposed to exist. Not here. Not inside my land. Not inside 500 acres that I had protected for years. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Not out of anger. Not yet. But out of realization. Because this wasn't temporary. This wasn't accidental. This was built, planned, executed, and maintained. I drove deeper inside. And with every turn, the reality became clearer. More houses. More structures. More signs of permanence. This wasn't just trespassing. This was transformation. Someone had taken my forest and turned it into a community. Without permission. Without ownership. Without legal authority. And then I saw it. A second sign. Clear. Official. Unmistakable. HOA Administration Office. That was the moment everything became certain. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was organized control. Operating inside land that did not belong to them. And in that moment, I understood something very clearly. Someone had decided to treat my land like it was theirs. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and stepped out. The air felt different. Heavier. Like the forest itself was aware. Watching. Waiting. Like it had been holding this moment. Until I returned. I stood there for a second, looking at the building. Then I started walking. Slow steps. Measured. Controlled. Because moments like this don't require speed. They require clarity. I reached the door, paused, then opened it, and stepped inside. The inside of the HOA office was modern. Too modern. Everything inside felt carefully designed. Like it wasn't just a workplace, but a statement. Clean white walls. Glass tables that reflected every movement. Soft corporate lighting that removed all shadows. And silence that felt controlled. Not natural. Controlled silence always means one thing. Power. Or at least the illusion of it. Because authority means nothing when it is built on stolen assumptions. 3 people were inside the room. A man in a tailored suit. A woman sitting beside him with organized folders. And another man sitting at the head of the table. The one who clearly believed he was in charge. He looked up first and smiled. Not nervously, not cautiously, but confidently. Like he already knew who I was. You must be the absentee landowner. That word hit differently. Absentee. Not just a description, but a judgment. Like I had abandoned something. Like I had been careless. Like I had given up ownership simply by being away. I didn't react immediately. Because reaction is something people expect. Instead, I stayed still. And slowly placed my folder on the table. Carefully. Deliberately. Then I spoke. Calm. Controlled. Certain. I am the owner of this land. The room changed instantly. Not dramatically, but subtly. A shift in energy. A pause that lasted just a second too long. The kind of silence that appears when people realize the conversation is no longer going the way they planned. The man at the head of the table leaned back slightly. Still composed. Still trying to maintain control. And then he spoke again. Well, technically, this area is now under HOA governance. I looked at him directly. No emotion yet. Just focus. Under whose authority? A small smile appeared on his face. Not confident anymore, but defensive confidence. The kind people use when they are unsure but don't want to show it. Under the development agreement. That was the first crack. Not visible to them, but visible to me. Because I already knew something was wrong. A development agreement is not something you assume. It is something you prove. I opened the folder. Slowly. And intentionally. Not rushed. Because control in moments like this is everything. Inside were documents. One after another. Neatly arranged. Deed of ownership. Tax registration records. Official survey maps. Government-stamped land certifications. Everything aligned. Everything legal. Everything undeniable. I placed them on the table one by one. Not aggressively, but with purpose. Each document landing softly, but carrying legal weight far heavier than the room itself. The woman glanced at them briefly, then quickly looked away. That was enough for me to notice. Because people avoid documents when they already know the truth will hurt their position. The man at the head didn't react much. He tried to maintain composure. But now his voice carried less certainty. Even if you own the land, development rights were transferred. I paused, slowly raised my eyes, and looked directly at him. Not angry, not emotional, just focused. And I asked one question. Calmly. Show me that transfer. Silence. No immediate response. Not even a hesitation answer. Just silence. Because there was nothing to show. And silence in legal rooms is never neutral. It is always meaningful. I leaned forward slightly. My voice still controlled. Still steady. There is no transfer. There is no agreement. There is no legal connection between you and my land. The atmosphere in the room shifted again. This time more noticeably. The confidence didn't disappear completely, but it started to fracture. They were no longer speaking like authority figures. Now they were reacting like people trying to protect a position they could not fully justify. The woman finally spoke. Carefully. We were informed this land was part of the expansion zone. I nodded slowly. Because now we were getting closer to the real source of the problem. By who? Another silence. A heavier one this time. Because everyone in the room already knew the answer. But saying it out loud would change everything. Finally, one of them spoke quietly. A private developer. Someone who had no legal ownership over my land. Someone who had no authority to sell, divide, or include it in anything. But someone who had spoken with enough confidence to make others believe it. And that belief was now standing in front of me as a fully built community. Inside my property, I closed the folder. Slowly. Finality in the movement. And then I said the sentence that changed the entire tone of the room. You built a community on land you never verified. That sentence didn't need to be loud. It didn't need emotion. Because truth doesn't require volume. It requires clarity. And for the first time, I saw discomfort. Real discomfort. Not panic yet, but awareness. The kind that arrives when people realize they are not just in a disagreement. They are in a legal collapse. But even then, the meeting wasn't over. Because denial often survives longer than truth. The man at the head of the table straightened slightly, trying to regain control of the situation, trying to bring structure back into chaos. And then he said something predictable. We'll need to verify this with our legal team. I didn't stop him, because I already knew verification would lead to the same result. Truth doesn't change when reviewed. It only becomes harder to ignore. Then they requested something else. A second meeting. This time, with lawyers present. More structure. More formality. More defense. And I agreed. Not because I needed to, but because I already knew what would happen next. Because once a system is built on incorrect assumptions, the second meeting is never a solution. It is a confirmation of collapse. And as I left the room that day, I understood something very clearly. They were no longer defending a misunderstanding. They were defending something much worse. A mistake that had already become permanent. The second meeting was different. Not in appearance, but in energy. Because this time, everyone in the room already knew something had changed. The silence was heavier before anyone even spoke. Not calm silence, but pressured silence. The kind that forms when people are waiting for bad news they already suspect is coming. The HOA had lawyers this time. Serious ones. Professional ones. People trained to defend systems. To argue interpretation. To delay consequences. But I also had legal representation. And in moments like this, legal presence does not create power. It only reveals truth. Because law doesn't bend for confidence. It bends for evidence. I placed one final survey map on the table. Large, detailed, official, rolled carefully, not thrown. not rushed. Because truth deserves precision. The moment it touched the table, every eye in the room shifted toward it. I spoke first. Calm. Direct. No emotion. Just clarity. Let's make this simple. No one interrupted. No one spoke. I continued. This map shows the legal boundary of my 500-acre timberland. I pointed at the highlighted perimeter, the thick boundary line drawn by certified surveyors. And then I paused, letting the visual speak before my words continued. Then I said it. Slowly. Clearly. And everything inside this boundary belongs to me. I lifted my gaze and looked at each person in the room, one by one, making sure there was no misunderstanding. Then I delivered the final line. Everything you built is inside it. That sentence didn't raise my voice. It didn't need to, because impact doesn't come from volume. It comes from inevitability. The HOA lawyer immediately leaned forward, trying to regain control of the narrative, trying to reshape reality into something survivable. This appears to be a misunderstanding in land registry alignment. That was the first defensive attempt. A professional phrase, carefully chosen, but still, a deflection. Before I could respond, my lawyer opened his file. Slowly, deliberately, not emotional, just factual. And then he spoke. Calm, controlled, certain. There is no misunderstanding. That single sentence changed the atmosphere again. Not dramatically, but deeply. Because now it wasn't just a disagreement between parties. It was a direct contradiction between claims and certified documentation. He placed additional files on the table, one by one. Government-certified land records, updated boundary confirmations, historical ownership documentation tracing back decades, survey validation reports. Everything aligned perfectly. No gaps, no overlap, no ambiguity, just a single legal reality. And that reality was simple. The HOA had built an entire residential community. Inside private land they did not own. Inside land that had never been transferred, never sold, never authorized. A pause filled the room. Longer this time. Heavier. The kind of silence that appears when denial begins to lose structure. Then the chairman spoke. And for the first time, his voice wasn't confident. It carried weight, concern, and something closer to fear. We've already sold homes here. People live here. Families are here. That statement changed the emotional tone of the room. Because now it was no longer just about land. It was about consequences affecting real lives. But truth does not adjust itself based on impact. It does not pause for sympathy. It does not bend for emotional pressure. I looked at him and answered quietly. That is not my legal responsibility. No anger. No satisfaction. Just fact. And in legal spaces, facts are heavier than emotion. Silence filled the room again. But this time it was different. Not uncertain silence, but collapsing silence. The kind that happens when structure stops holding. When arguments stop forming. When every participant realizes there is no remaining angle to defend. Then came the final statement. From the legal side. Official. Clear. Unavoidable. All structures exist on privately owned timberland. Any continued governance without agreement constitutes trespassing and unlawful administration. That was it. No counter-argument followed. No interruption. No correction. Because there was nothing left that could change it. The legal truth had fully formed. And once that happens, discussion ends. The meeting didn't explode immediately. It dissolved. Slowly. Like pressure being released from something that was never built to contain it. Voices began to rise at the edges of the room. Confusion. Urgency. Arguments between board members. Lawyers speaking over each other. Documents being shuffled rapidly. Phones being checked. Messages being sent. But underneath all of it was the same realization forming in every mind present. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was a legal collapse already in motion. And I remained still. Because when truth is already established, reaction is unnecessary. Time passed after that meeting. Not days, not hours, but a sequence of unfolding consequences. The HOA board eventually resigned. One by one. Unable to maintain authority over a structure built on incorrect ownership assumptions. Legal investigations were launched. Not optional. Mandatory. Developers were sued. Because responsibility always traces backward when mistakes scale. Residents were notified. Carefully. Officially. And settlement discussions began. Not for victory, but for resolution. For relocation. For compensation. for correction of what should never have been built without verification. But through all of it, I did not celebrate. I did not feel victory, because this was never about winning something. It was about restoring what had been wrongly constructed. And there is a difference between the two. One creates pride. The other creates responsibility. And in moments of silence after everything unfolded, I remembered something my grandfather once told me. Years ago, standing in the middle of that same forest, he said, "Land always remembers who tried to claim it without truth." At the time, I didn't understand it fully. But I do now. Because land doesn't react quickly. It doesn't respond loudly. It doesn't announce consequences immediately. It waits. It observes. It records everything quietly. And then, when the time is right, truth arrives. Not with noise, but with certainty. And when it does, it doesn't just resolve conflict. It changes everything around it. Because truth doesn't arrive early. But when it finally arrives, nothing remains the same.